Moving to Willowbrook Estates seemed like the perfect decision. The manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and well-maintained community amenities spoke to years of careful oversight. What I didn't anticipate was meeting Karen Pemberton, our H.O.A. president, whose idea of community leadership involved micromanaging every blade of grass and social interaction within our gates. The annual block party was scheduled for the first Saturday in June. As a new resident, I wanted to make a good impression, so I volunteered to coordinate the food arrangements. The sign-up sheet I posted asked each household to contribute a dish serving 8 to 10 people. Within days, nearly every family had committed to bringing something substantial: pasta salads, grilled meats, homemade desserts, fresh fruit platters. The community spirit was genuinely heartwarming. Karen signed up last, scrawling her name with a flourish next to napkins. Just napkins. For a gathering of 60-plus people, she committed to bringing paper napkins. I assumed she might surprise us with something additional, perhaps viewing the napkins as her baseline contribution rather than her entire offering. The morning of the party arrived with perfect weather. Neighbors began setting up tables in the community pavilion by 10 a.m., transforming the space into a festive gathering spot. I arrived early with my contribution, a large tray of bacon-wrapped scallops that had taken me 3 hours to prepare, along with 2 cases of imported sparkling water I'd picked up from my usual supplier downtown. By noon, the buffet table groaned under the weight of genuine homemade dishes. Mrs. Henderson from Maple Lane had brought her famous 3-layer potato gratin. The Johnson family contributed an enormous pot of their signature chili, simmering in a professional-grade slow cooker. The Martinez household arrived with authentic tamales, dozens of them, each wrapped with obvious care and attention. Karen appeared fashionably late, carrying a single package of generic paper napkins from the discount grocery store. She placed them at the far end of the buffet table, then immediately began surveying the spread with the calculating gaze of a general assessing enemy territory. "This looks absolutely wonderful, everyone," she announced loudly. "What a fantastic turnout. I'm so proud of our community's efforts." She picked up a plate and began what could only be described as systematic harvesting. Not serving herself reasonable portions, but loading her plate with quantities that would feed a small family. 3 large scoops of the potato gratin. For tamales, an enormous helping of chili that nearly overflowed her plate. She moved down the line like a combine harvester, leaving noticeably depleted serving dishes in her wake. "Karen," called out Mr. Peterson from Oak Street, "you might want to leave some for everyone else. We've got folks still arriving." Karen paused, her plate now resembling a small mountain of food, and fixed Mr. Peterson with a withering stare. "Excuse me, Robert, but I believe I have every right to enjoy the fruits of my organizational labor. As H.O.A. president, I coordinated this entire event. Without my leadership, there wouldn't even be a block party." The pavilion felt uncomfortably quiet. Karen had, in fact, done nothing to organize the event beyond approving my initial request to hold it. I had handled the scheduling, the sign-up coordination, the permit applications, and even the equipment rentals. But challenging the H.O.A. president at a community gathering seemed like poor timing. Karen finished loading her first plate and immediately reached for a second one. She proceeded to fill this plate with similar abundance, claiming portions that would have served 3 or 4 people. When she reached my bacon-wrapped scallops, she didn't take a modest sampling. She transferred nearly half the tray onto her plate, leaving barely enough for the other 50-plus attendees. "These look expensive," she commented loudly while continuing to claim them. "I hope everyone can appreciate quality ingredients when they see them." I watched in fascination as Karen balanced her 2 overloaded plates and found a table. She had effectively claimed enough food for a family of 6 while contributing napkins that probably cost her less than $3. But the real show was just beginning. Karen ate with remarkable efficiency, finishing both plates within 20 minutes. Most neighbors were still arriving, having expected the typical leisurely pace of a community gathering. By the time families with young children appeared, ready to enjoy lunch together, they discovered a significantly diminished buffet. The Martinez family's beautiful tamales were completely gone. Karen had claimed them all. Mrs. Henderson's potato gratin was nearly finished, leaving maybe 2 small servings for 50 remaining people. My carefully prepared scallops had vanished, along with most of the substantial main dishes. "I'm still a bit hungry," Karen announced, approaching the buffet for round 3. I hope no one minds if I finish off some of these smaller portions. By smaller portions, she meant the remaining food that everyone else was supposed to share. She loaded a third plate, effectively claiming the last of several dishes. Families who had contributed significant time and money to this gathering watched their own contributions disappear before they could serve their children. Little Emma Johnson, maybe 6 years old, approached the buffet table with her paper plate and found empty serving dishes where the tamales had been. Her mother had promised her she could try Mrs. Martinez's famous recipe. The disappointment on her face was heartbreaking. "Mommy, where did all the food go?" Emma asked in that caring voice children possess. "Sometimes people take more than their share, sweetie," Mrs. Johnson replied diplomatically, though her expression suggested less charitable thoughts. Karen, apparently oblivious to the growing tension, continued eating her third plate while offering commentary on the various dishes. The tamales were quite good, though perhaps a bit heavy on the spices. The potato gratin could have used more seasoning. These scallops were acceptable, though I've had better at the country club. She was critiquing food she had essentially hoarded while families who had spent their Saturday morning cooking for the community stood around with empty plates. The audacity was almost impressive in its completeness. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's husband, finally spoke up. "Karen, my wife spent 8 hours preparing that potato gratin yesterday. She used her grandmother's recipe and bought premium ingredients. It was meant to feed the entire community, not serve as your personal lunch." Karen's response was immediate and indignant. "Excuse me, Tom, but I think you're forgetting who made this event possible. As H.O.A. president, I have responsibilities that apparently go unrecognized. If I choose to enjoy the food at a community gathering that I authorize, that's entirely within my rights." "You authorized it," I interjected, unable to remain silent. "I submitted the paperwork, reserved the pavilion, organized the sign-up sheet, and coordinated with the county for permits." "What exactly did you authorize?" Karen's face flushed red, but her voice remained imperious. "I signed off on your request, which makes me ultimately responsible for this event's success. Without my approval, none of this would have happened. I think a little gratitude would be more appropriate than criticism." The gathering had devolved into something uncomfortable and tense. Children were crying because there wasn't enough food left for them to try the dishes their friends had brought. Adults who had spent significant time and money contributing to the community were watching Karen finish her third heaping plate, while offering critiques of their efforts. But Karen wasn't finished. She approached the dessert section, which had remained largely untouched because most people hadn't progressed beyond the main course. The dessert table featured homemade pies, cookies, brownies, and a beautiful cake that the Williams family had special ordered from a bakery downtown. Karen cut herself an enormous slice of cake, then added brownies, cookies, and a substantial piece of apple pie to her fourth plate. She was single-handedly consuming what was meant to be shared among 60 people, having contributed nothing but discount napkins and endless commentary. "This cake is quite good," she announced between bites, "though perhaps a bit sweet for my taste. I prefer the European-style desserts they serve at the country club." Mrs. Williams looked like she was contemplating violence. Her family had spent $80 on that cake specifically for the community gathering, and Karen was claiming multiple pieces while disparaging the quality. The block party effectively ended at that point. Families began cleaning up and leaving, their children having experienced disappointment and adults having witnessed something unprecedented in its selfishness. Karen remained at her table, working through her fourth plate while seemingly oblivious to the mass exodus occurring around her. As I helped stack chairs and fold tables, I made mental notes. Karen had revealed something fundamental about her character, something that went beyond typical H.O.A. officiousness into genuine narcissism and disrespect for her neighbors. This wasn't going to be an isolated incident. This was who she was. Over the following weeks, Karen's behavior confirmed my assessment. She began issuing violation notices for infractions, so minor they bordered on harassment. My mailbox received a citation because it was positioned 3 inches beyond the approved setback line. Mrs. Henderson got written up because her roses extended 4 inches past the designated garden boundary. The Martinez family received a formal complaint about unauthorized decorative elements, which turned out to be a small ceramic frog barely visible among their flower bushes. But Karen was just getting started. She instituted mandatory monthly H.O.A. meetings, sending certified letters requiring attendance. She created new rules limiting everything from outdoor furniture colors to the number of potted plants allowed on porches. She appointed herself to inspect every property monthly, armed with a measuring tape and camera to document violations. The harassment campaign intensified when she discovered my background. During a particularly contentious H.O.A. meeting about new landscaping restrictions, Karen made a snide comment about people who think money can buy them exemptions from community standards. I had mentioned, perhaps unwisely, that some of the proposed rules would require expensive modifications that might be difficult for families on fixed incomes. Not everyone has your resources, Karen said with obvious disdain. Some of us work for our money instead of inheriting it or making it in questionable ways. She had apparently done some research and discovered that I had sold my previous business for a substantial sum before moving to Willowbrook Estates. What she hadn't discovered was exactly what that business involved, or why a 38-year-old had been able to retire comfortably to a gated community. She seemed to assume I was some sort of trust fund beneficiary or possibly involved in something unsavory. Karen's assumptions about my background were both wrong and revealing. I had spent 15 years building a specialized consulting firm that helped municipalities navigate complex zoning disputes and land use regulations. My clients included city councils, planning departments, and developers who needed expert guidance through the labyrinthine world of local government bureaucracy. I understood property law, municipal codes, and regulatory systems with the precision of a master craftsman. But Karen didn't know any of that. She saw someone younger than herself with apparent financial resources and decided to make my life difficult out of pure spite. The violation notices became more frequent and increasingly creative. She cited me for having unauthorized plant varieties because I had planted herbs in my back garden without submitting detailed landscaping plans. She complained that my car was parked improperly because one tire touched the edge of my driveway rather than sitting completely within the painted lines. The breaking point came 3 months after the block party disaster. Karen appeared at my front door on a Tuesday morning with her measuring tape, camera, and official H.O.A. clipboard. She had developed a routine of unannounced inspections, documenting any possible violations with the thoroughness of a crime scene investigator. "I need to measure your mailbox again," she announced without preamble. "I have reports that you've moved it since my last citation." The mailbox hadn't moved. It was cemented into the ground and had been positioned by the previous homeowner 15 years ago. But Karen spent 20 minutes measuring its distance from the curb, the property line, and the sidewalk, taking photographs from multiple angles and making notes on her clipboard. "This is definitely not in compliance," she declared with obvious satisfaction. "You'll be receiving a formal violation notice requiring immediate correction. Continued noncompliance will result in daily fines until the issue is resolved." I watched her performance with growing fascination. Karen had transformed petty H.O.A. enforcement into performance art, wielding her tiny amount of authority like a medieval queen dispensing justice to peasants. She clearly derived genuine pleasure from finding violations and issuing citations, particularly when she could target someone she perceived as privileged or entitled. "Karen," I said as she prepared to leave, "can I ask you something?" She paused, perhaps expecting an apology or plea for leniency. "What exactly do you hope to accomplish with all this?" I continued. "The mailbox has been in that exact position for 15 years. The previous owner never received violations. The position complies with county regulations and postal service requirements. You're creating problems where none existed." Karen's response was immediate and heated. "What I'm accomplishing is maintaining the standards that make this community desirable. People like you move in here and think the rules don't apply to them because you have money. Well, I'm here to make sure everyone follows the same standards, regardless of their bank account." "People like me?" I asked mildly. "Yes, people who think they can buy their way out of responsibility. People who show up with expensive food and fancy water trying to show off. People who question legitimate authority because they're not used to being told what to do." There it was. Karen was still nursing resentment from the block party, where she had consumed enormous quantities of everyone else's food while contributing nothing. In her mind, I had somehow insulted her by bringing quality ingredients and organizing the event she had failed to plan. My willingness to spend money on the community gathering had been interpreted as showing off rather than contributing. I see, I said. Thank you for clarifying your perspective. Karen left, obviously satisfied with her moral victory. She had put the entitled rich guy in his place and demonstrated that her authority was absolute within the boundaries of Willowbrook Estates. What she didn't realize was that she had just provided me with crucial intelligence about her motivations in psychology. That evening I made some phone calls. My former business partner now worked for the county planning department. My attorney had extensive experience with municipal law and H.O.A. governance. My old mentor from the consulting firm had recently retired from a senior position in the state commerce department. I wasn't looking for special favors or shortcuts. I was gathering information about the regulatory framework that governed our little community. The research phase took several weeks, but the results were illuminating. Willowbrook Estates operated under a specific type of municipal agreement that granted the H.O.A. unusual authority over common areas and architectural standards. But that authority came with corresponding responsibilities and legal obligations that Karen had been routinely ignoring. More interesting was the ownership structure of the community amenities. The pavilion where Karen had staged her food hoarding performance, the pool, the playground, and the decorative pond were all owned by a community trust rather than the H.O.A. directly. The trust was governed by specific bylaws that required transparent financial management and community input on major decisions. Karen had been operating as if she owned these amenities personally, making unilateral decisions about their use and maintenance without consulting the community or following the established governance procedures. She was, technically speaking, exceeding her authority in ways that could be legally challenged. But the most interesting discovery involved the community's founding documents. Willowbrook Estates had been developed in phases over 20 years, with different sections subject to slightly different covenant restrictions. Karen lived in Phase 1, which had the most restrictive architectural standards. Most residents, including myself, lived in Phase 3, which had more relaxed rules about landscaping, decorative elements, and structural modifications. Karen had been enforcing Phase 1 restrictions on Phase 3 residents, essentially making up rules that didn't legally apply to most of the community. Every violation notice she had issued to residents outside Phase 1 was potentially invalid, including all of mine. Armed with this information, I began planning my response. Karen had made this personal by attacking my character and background. She had demonstrated contempt for her neighbors and abuse of her limited authority. Most importantly, she had revealed her core weakness: an overwhelming need to be recognized as important and powerful within the community. The plan I developed would give Karen exactly what she craved, while simultaneously destroying her ability to enjoy it. She wanted to be the undisputed authority figure in Willowbrook Estates. I would ensure she achieved that goal in the most spectacular and permanent way possible. Phase 1 involved quietly purchasing several strategic properties within the community. The original developer still owned 3 undeveloped lots in Phase 1, including 2 that bordered Karen's property directly. These lots had been marketed unsuccessfully for several years, because Phase 1's restrictive covenants made them difficult and expensive to develop. I approached the developer through an intermediary and made an offer significantly above asking price with a rapid closing timeline. The developer was thrilled to finally sell these problem properties, especially at a premium price to a cash buyer who didn't require financing contingencies. Next, I purchased the small commercial property that housed the community's management company office. The building was owned by an elderly couple who had been looking to sell for years, but hadn't found qualified buyers. I offered them 15% above their asking price and closed within 2 weeks. Finally, I acquired a controlling interest in the community trust that owned the amenities. The trust had been seeking additional investors to fund planned improvements to the pool and playground equipment. As the largest single investor, I gained significant influence over trust decisions and amenity management. These purchases took place over 2 months, handled through different legal entities to avoid raising immediate suspicions. Karen remained focused on her violation citation campaign, completely unaware that the foundational structure of her little kingdom was shifting beneath her feet. Phase 2 involved legal action. I retained the law firm that specialized in HOA governance disputes and provided them with detailed documentation of Karen's unauthorized rule enforcement, financial mismanagement, and procedural violations. The attorneys filed a comprehensive complaint with the State Commerce Department's Community Association Oversight Division. The complaint detailed dozens of specific violations of state regulations governing HOA operations. Karen had failed to provide required financial disclosures, had imposed unauthorized fees, had exceeded her enforcement authority, and had violated residents' due process rights by issuing citations without proper notification procedures. Simultaneously, I filed individual challenges to every violation notice Karen had issued to Phase 3 residents over the previous year. Each challenge demonstrated that the underlying rules she was enforcing didn't legally apply to the properties in question, making her citations invalid and potentially fraudulent. The legal pressure was designed to overwhelm Karen's ability to respond effectively, while documenting a pattern of misconduct that would justify more serious consequences. But the real masterstroke was still to come. Phase 3 launched exactly 1 year after Karen's block party performance. I had timed everything to coincide with the next annual community gathering, which Karen had again volunteered to organize, while doing no actual work. The morning of the block party, Karen received several certified letters simultaneously. The first informed her that the State Commerce Department was launching a formal investigation into her HOA management practices, with potential penalties including removal from office and personal financial liability for unauthorized expenditures. The second letter came from my attorneys, notifying her that all violation notices issued to Phase 3 residents were being challenged in court, with Karen personally named as a defendant in a class action lawsuit seeking damages for harassment and abuse of authority. The third letter was from the Community Trust, informing her that new bylaws had been adopted requiring HOA president approval for all amenity usage, including the block party scheduled for that afternoon. As the trust's primary investor, I had voted to implement this requirement immediately. But Karen didn't receive these letters until after she had arrived at the pavilion and begun her familiar routine of claiming enormous quantities of food while contributing nothing substantial. This year, she had brought plastic spoons to go with last year's napkins, apparently considering this an upgrade in her community contribution. I watched from across the pavilion as Karen loaded her first plate with her characteristic thoroughness, claiming portions that would have fed several families. She had learned nothing from the previous year's community reaction, and was repeating her performance exactly, seemingly oblivious to the disgusted stares of her neighbors. She was halfway through filling her second plate when my attorney arrived with a sheriff's deputy to serve additional legal documents. The deputy approached Karen at the buffet table, while she was holding a serving spoon loaded with Mrs. Henderson's potato salad. "Karen Pemberton?" the deputy inquired. "Yes, that's me," Karen replied, apparently assuming this was some sort of community recognition or official acknowledgement of her HOA presidency. "You're being served with legal documents regarding multiple violations of state community association regulations," the deputy announced, handing her a thick envelope. The pavilion fell silent. Karen stood frozen, still holding the serving spoon, as she tried to process what was happening. She opened the envelope and began reading, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and growing panic as she absorbed the scope of the legal action against her. "There must be some mistake," she said loudly. "I'm the HOA president. I follow all the rules. This is obviously some sort of misunderstanding." My attorney stepped forward with additional documents. "Ms. Pemberton, you're also being served with notice that your authority to approve community amenity usage has been suspended pending investigation. This gathering was not properly authorized under the new trust bylaws." Karen's face went pale. "What are you talking about? I authorized this event months ago. This is our annual block party. Under the revised trust bylaws adopted last month, HOA presidents must reapply for amenity usage approval through the new Oversight Committee," the attorney explained patiently. "No such application was submitted for today's event." "That's ridiculous," Karen sputtered. "I've been organizing community events for 3 years. I don't need permission from some committee." "Actually you do," I said, stepping forward for the first time. "And as the chairman of that Oversight Committee, I'm formally notifying you that today's gathering lacks proper authorization." Karen stared at me with growing comprehension and horror. You're behind this somehow. I'm simply following the rules, I replied mildly. The same rules you've been so enthusiastic about enforcing. Speaking of which, I should mention that the State Commerce Department investigation will likely result in your removal from office and personal financial liability for the unauthorized fines you've collected over the past year. That's impossible, Karen protested. I collected those fines legally. I followed proper procedures. Actually, you didn't, my attorney interjected. Our investigation found that most of your violation notices were issued under covenant restrictions that don't apply to the properties in question. You've been enforcing Phase 1 rules on Phase 3 residents without legal authority. Karen's hands were shaking now as she absorbed the implications. You can't do this to me. I'm the H.O.A. president. This community needs leadership. Which brings us to the final matter, I continued. As the new owner of the commercial property where the H.O.A. maintains its offices, I'm required to give you 30 days' notice of lease termination. Your office space will no longer be available after next month. The serving spoon fell from Karen's hand, clattering onto the buffet table and splattering potato salad across the tablecloth. She looked around the pavilion at the faces of her neighbors, all of whom were watching her public humiliation with fascination and barely concealed satisfaction. You planned this, she whispered. All of this. The legal action, the trust bylaws, everything. I simply invested in community properties and ensured that H.O.A. governance follows state regulations, I replied. Everything I've done is completely legal and properly documented. But why? Karen asked, her voice cracking. Why would you go to such lengths? Do you remember what you said to me about people like me? I asked quietly. About how I thought money could buy exemptions from responsibility. About how I was trying to show off with expensive food and fancy water. Karen's face crumpled as she recalled her accusations and their context. You were right about one thing, I continued. Money can accomplish remarkable things when properly applied. For instance, it can purchase the legal expertise needed to document systematic abuse of authority. It can acquire strategic properties that control community governance. It can fund comprehensive investigations into regulatory compliance. I paused, letting the full scope of her situation sink in. Most importantly, it can ensure that someone who shows such contempt for their neighbors faces appropriate consequences for their behavior. Karen stood in stunned silence, finally understanding that her small-time tyranny had provoked a response far beyond her ability to comprehend or counter. She had targeted someone with the resources, expertise, and patience to systematically dismantle her entire power structure, while ensuring every action was completely legal and permanent. The woman who had hoarded community food while contributing nothing, who had harassed neighbors with invalid citations, who had abused her authority for personal satisfaction, now faced complete professional and social destruction within the community she had tried to dominate. Her shocked expression as she realized the elegant precision of her own downfall was absolutely perfect.